Taking schematic texturing a little bit further, let's talk about a new feature in 901 called Texture Switch, and that's this guy right here. I've set up a little scene, and this will kind of help show you this. You can load this up. It's called Texture Switch. But let me go ahead and clean all of this out, and I will rebuild this, and we can do it together so that you can see what's going on. All right, so we're going to remove all that, get these guys back to normal, and I'm going to save this scene as Texture Switch Start. And this way you guys can load this one up. Okay, so what the texture switch is doing is kind of like the variation texture, but takes us a little bit further. So let's do this. We are over in the render tab. I'm under the schematic tab beneath. And from the add drop down, we're going to go down to shader nodes. And we're going to come into texture. Let's add a cellular. Okay, we're going to drop a little cellular on there. And where are we going to drop this? Well, we want to put it on the surface of the dog. So over here in our shader tree, here is not the nails, but just the dog fur. Let's make sure there's a material for it. We're going to drag that material in there. Okay. So cellular is going to actually go onto the material, just the way we would layer it up in the shader tree. However, we're going to vary it a bit. And we're going to do that by coming into shader inputs, and we're going to come down and select Texture Switch. Okay, and we're going to take that cellular and drop it right into texture. And now here's the thing. In this version of Modo, it might be fixed by the time you get this video, there's a little bit of a bug or something going on in the texture switch. So pause your render, restart it, kind of move your screen a little bit, and then we'll make sure that that shows up once we put the color value into diffuse color. Okay, so if things aren't showing up, you can see it is here. Make sure you just kind of pause and start to render again. All right, so this cellular texture is now planted all over these dogs. Gives them a little interesting shading. By selecting this cellular texture, you can come over here on the right and change some of the values. So we could change the width, cut that in half, double the transition, things like that, or we'll go the opposite way, you know, just to give it some variation. Okay, so we'll keep it about here like this, and actually I think maybe that was okay. I'll bring that back down just so we have a little bit of shading on there. Okay, so that's the cellular texture. Let's add some more. So I'm going to come into add, and we're going to go to input. I want shader nodes, other, and then image map. And for the image over here under load image, I've got this desert ground. Now you can find this in your scene files and your project folders. So we're going to select that image. That image will also be put into texture. If you open this up, you can see we're adding those up. It doesn't matter that these are crossed over, but if you're a little anal and OCD, you can put one in and then the next, like that. Still crossed over, but now we've got this nice kind of, you know, desert ground put over these guys, which is great. So let's go ahead and add a variation texture. So we'll go to add, and then we'll come down here to shader inputs, let's see, shader nodes, processing, variation texture. All right, and then we're going to take the texture value of this variation and put it into the input value of the switch. And let's pause and render again. Get that going. And what you're going to see is really not much happen. And the reason is, with that variation texture selected, if you look over here in the variations dropdown, the default source is set to particle. If you change that to item, and when we middle click and create a key over here, and we ramp that value, and there you see the variation start to place itself across the individual items based on this gradient. So we can then shake up this gradient, add a few more keys, and then start interpolating where this texture lies across these different items. So you can see the possibilities of this when you go to mesh parts, texture particles, or even just particles themselves, where you can identify different mixes of textures and procedurals and image maps, all with the variation and texture switch across multiple items. So think about things like you know, a sea of gumballs or a jar full of, you know, gummy bears and things like that, where you need that variation texture, which is what allows you to apply different colors and textures on those particular items. But now you can go that much further. One thing with the texture switch is to make sure interpolate is on, because that then blends those a little bit. Now you may not want it. You may want to keep that a little bit more individualized like this. But if you want a blend of all of these, put interpolate on. Okay, so try that out for yourself. Add a lot more of these procedurals as you wish. Come down here to add, and then go to shader nodes. Come down here to textures, and let's add maybe some dots. Dots are always good. Take that dot texture and drop it into the texture for the texture switch. And now you've got a dot variation mixed in with all of those as well. You can do some really crazy textures. Now I found this is actually useful. The one time I did actually get to use it for something was a landscape. And I really had kind of a nasty ground and started with a base image map like this and then started putting rocks and textures and all kinds of things and used the texture switch to just vary that across. So it could work out really well. All right, let's move on to the next part. We've got a lot to cover.